Welcome everyone to the Space to Stay Whole, a conversation with Billy Ray Belcourt and Alicia Elliott. Excuse me. My name is China Reavers, and I'm here on behalf of the Montana Book Festival, which wouldn't have been possible without the Whitefish Review and our other sponsors this year. We're really excited to welcome Billy Ray and Alicia to this year's virtual festival, but I wanted to first take care of a little housekeeping. We'd like to welcome you as attendees to submit your questions to our authors via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Colin Johnson is on hand to read your questions and pass them on to Billy Ray and Alicia. We're gonna save those till the end, so if you don't see them answered, don't worry about it. We're gonna get to them in about the last 10 minutes. And rest assured, we are seeing you. Feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves while the event is taking place. Colin will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat for questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our authors. Billy Ray Belcourt is from the Driftpile Cree Nation. He is Canada's first First Nations Rhodes Scholar. He is the author of the poetry collections Indian Coping Mechanisms and The Wound is a World, which was awarded the 2018 Canadian Griffin Poetry Prize, the 2018 Robert Croce City of Edmonton Book Prize, and a 2018 Indigenous Voices Award. In 2018, Belcourt was named by CBC Books as one of the 14 Canadian poets to watch, one of the 18 emerging writers to watch, a writer to know, and one of 10 young Canadians to watch by the CBC. A brief history of my brief body, or a history of my brief body marks his nonfiction debut. I'm like, thanks guys for just rolling with me on this. Alicia Elliott's writing has been published in the Washington Post, the Globe, and Mail, Vice, and the Best American Short Stories 2018, among others. She has been shortlisted for the Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for nonfiction. Born in Buffalo, New York, and raised between there and Ohio, she now lives in Brantford, Ontario, with her husband and child. I'm really excited to get into this with you guys. So with that, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Cool. My name is Billy Belcourt from the Driftpile Cree Nation. I am zooming into you from Vancouver, British Columbia, the ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. This is from an essay in the book called Futuromania. I'm a body of knowledge, not one of chemical compounds, which is to say it is the fate of NDNs to live as ideas do. It is on the res that one can hear words speak as though in a chorus. To tear the page is to tear our world apart. What shame to be a sentence on its knees. The day I obtained my driver's license, I followed a cumulus cloud through a maze of dirt road until it evaporated. 40 minutes. That was all it took. I bore witness. No one asked this of me, but I wanted to keep watch of the dying everywhere so I could figure out how to care for a bleeding sentence. Indian writer bemoans the red condition, which is that wherever he goes, he posits his queerness as a metaphysical conundrum. With each lispy word, modern history aggregates inside him like a wasp colony. Everywhere he is met by rows and rows of Michel Foucaults who promise he is freer than he thinks. Indian writer chuckles to himself now and then about the idiosyncrasy of this. Indian writer is reminded of Judith Butler, who in Gender Trouble ruminates on what she calls the sentimental Foucault. The Foucault who, despite his paranoid habits of diagnosis and disavowal, sometimes paused and stood beside himself to nod to a less disciplinary elsewhere. Legendarily, Foucault seldom spoke about himself. He and Indian writer don't have this in common. But Indian writer does suspect that Foucault's sentimentality had everything to do with something he has already written down in another poem. No one runs the theory unless there is a dirt road in him. Indian writer is hard at work on the paradox that one can be born into a past and at the same time indecipherable to it. That is his job, to keep watch of paradox. Indian writer knows that this isn't a new undertaking. To be unoriginal might have humiliated Indian writer a few years ago, but it doesn't matter. because today he's in a boat with a bunch of Foucaults, minutes away from an island where the only universal is that there are no bodies to bury, and thus no longer a need to make shovels out of our heavy hands. Until today, I railed against the grisly fate reserved for men like me. I'm an anachronism in the way that all queer men are anachronisms, far too early. I'm a poet in the way that all queer men are poets, not a novel thought likely. Ours is the audacity of begging for a compassionate wilderness. Jose Esteban Munoz wrote, "The queer citizen subject labors to live in a present that is calibrated to sacrifice our liveness. I don't need a record of my here-ness. What I do need is to take ecstasy with Jose Esteban Munoz. Paradise is wherever he is. Until then, I will try to be a pretty wound at least once. Confession. I'm not yet comfortable taking my shirt off in a poem. Subjectivity abuses, subjectivity rescues. Men shoved my head into the clouds. I missed so much. There is humiliation in this dystopia too. Here my words appear in the air upside down. My mouth is a dirty floor. I'm sweeping up the dirt with my imagination." Thank you.
Okay, should I go? Am I on? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, it's a little weird because I'm still getting used to this whole Zoom, all of this technology. I'm not very good at it. But anyways, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Billy Ray Belcourt, which I'm gonna say all the time because you're a doctor, which is fucking so. Thank you, Dr. Billy Ray Belcourt. That was beautiful, and I will also read now. So I'm just gonna, I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to read today, and I don't know, there was, I think out of solidarity with a lot of the Black scholars that are doing Scholar Strike Canada, I'm gonna read a section from an essay in my book called Sontag and Snapshots. So if you haven't read my book, which you should, I need money. Basically the way that the essay works is I take an essay that was written by Susan Sontag about photography, and I kind of just like take these little pieces of it and then kind of like respond to it and kind of update it and everything. So it's kind of like a conversation, an essay conversation, but like kind of one-sided because Susan Sontag ain't saying shit to me right now. So anyway. All right, so the quote that I'm going to read from is first is Susan Sontag's quote, which is, "Photographs furnish evidence. The camera record incriminates." And this is me. When Black Lives Matter started mobilizing around police violence against Black people in the wake of the murders of Eric Garner and Michael Brown, many people thought the solution was body cameras. If photographs furnish evidence, went their logic, surely camera footage could furnish all the evidence needed to prove or disprove charges of racist police violence. Of course, many Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color suspected that this wouldn't be the case. But white people, people who had never had reason to fear police, were adamant. There are instances where anti-Black police violence caught on film has been used as evidence. 27-year-old Philip Alafe was taken into the Brantford police station on July 3rd, 2015 after an arrest. He told the booking officer he had depression and anxiety, though he wasn't suicidal, and that he had sickle cell anemia, thus requiring regular medication to help alleviate his ongoing pain. Alafe, it's important to note, is a Black man. Staff Sergeant Cheney Venn, anyways, that's the name, a white police officer, came on duty at 10:30 p.m. I feel obligated to disclose that Venn was the police officer at my high school when I went there from 2002 until 2006, though I never interacted with him personally. Alafe, or I think it's Alaf, sorry, it's been a while since I remembered the pronunciation, hoping for more medication, began throwing wet toilet paper at the camera around 11 p.m. to get the attention of the officers on duty. Venn yelled at him to stop. When Olaf wouldn't stop, Venn removed Olaf's mattress and blanket from his cell, telling him he'd get them back when he behaved. He gave Olaf one pill, though Olaf was allowed up to 3 if needed. Still in pain and wanting his mattress and blanket back, Olaf tied his jumpsuit and shirt to the bars of his cell over the next few hours. Then came back twice and told him not to do that. He didn't return his mattress or blanket. At 3 a.m., then came back to Olaf's cell and punched him 3 times, then took his jumpsuit and all other clothing from him except for his socks, leaving him naked and cold in his cell. Olaf's doctor has described his pain as unbearable and, unfortunately, made even worse by cold, dehydration, and stress. Meanwhile, then, who admitted in court he hadn't tried to determine what Olaf's medical conditions were, decided Olaf did not need medical attention or more medication. He thought Olaf's claiming to have a chronic condition was simply an attempt to, quote, get out of the cells in order to go to a more comfortable setting. After Olaf spent 3 hours in pain, shivering naked on the floor, his desperation got the better of him, and he tried to fashion a noose out of his socks. After which he took his socks, it took 2 minutes for Ven to stop Olaf's suicide attempt, after which he took his socks and still refused to get him medical attention. At 7:30 a.m., when a new officer took over from Ven, he returned Olaf's jumpsuit and, shortly after, his mattress and blanket. Unsurprisingly, once Olaf finally had clothes, a blanket, and a mattress, he fell asleep. The reason I can relay all of this in detail, and the reason Ontario Court Justice Ken Lenz stayed the charges against Olaf, finding Olaf's rights were violated under Section 7 and 12 of the Charter of Canadian Rights and Freedoms, is because the incident was caught on camera. Justice Lenz admitted that without the cell videos, he probably would have believed Officer Ven's version of events. He needed proof. He needed the camera record. And yet, even though Lenz thoroughly rebuked Ven's behavior, calling it degrading to human dignity, and claimed that Olaf's perception that he could no longer trust police was, quote, a perception I'm beginning to share, then his abuser remained on regular duty as a police officer. Brantford Police Chief Jeffrey Nelson has said there is an ongoing investigation into, quote, potential professional misconduct, but there is no guarantee that Ben's abusing a Black disabled man will cost him his job or even lead to a few weeks of paid leave. After all, the officers who killed Eric Garner on camera were not indicted. The officers who shot Philando Castile while his girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, live streamed the entire encounter to Facebook was not indicted. The officer who shot 12-year-old Tamir Rice on camera was not indicted. So few of the white police officers who beat or kill Black people are ever indicted or even punished. The system's responsible for creating an environment where Officer Ven could abuse Olaf without worrying about the consequences. The systems that created Olaf's story in the first place continue, unchanged and unchecked. No matter how incriminating certain photos may be, and no matter how much people who never experienced anti-Black racism claim otherwise, there is no photographic record that can change these systems, not on their own. And that is where I'll stop, because I'm getting a little sassy, so. Okay, so obviously we're all very political and cute and everything. I kind of am curious though, because you moved from poetry to nonfiction and you're also super fucking smart and do a lot of academic writing. So I'm really interested, Billy, in what that was like. Because I remember the only time we met in person was at some conference where you were telling me you were writing this book and you were like, I don't know, it's weird because I'm writing like a memoir, but I'm so young. And I'm like, whatever, write your fucking memoir. You did. So, okay, so how was that? Like moving from poetry to prose and kind of navigating the weight that I think people have of memoirs and like you have to have a long life to be worthy of writing about your life, which is a weird concept to me. So yeah, I'm curious. Oh no, Billy, you're muted.
Thank you for that. That's the second time I've done that today. Lovely. So yeah, it makes me think of this comedian who has a joke about a 23-year-old friend who wants to write a memoir, and she says, she's like, maybe you should like try a pamphlet first if you're only 23. So I did get some folks asking about the designation of memoir, and it was actually not my idea. My editor at Penguin Canada suggested it, and I think, you know, partly because of its marketability, also because I am writing from lived experience, and that does, you know, I think mean that it's memoiristic. And I also think that there's something troubling about that norm that a memoir is written towards the end of one's life or in like a later period of one's life, especially as it relates to queer Indigenous people, because we don't have, you know, an extensive literature written by us. And so to ask those of us in our generation to wait to write about our lives, I think is disastrous, actually, politically corrupt to do. And because our work, you know, whether we intend it to be or not, does have the function of a beacon. It does, you know, attract people like us. You know, there are so many queer and trans Indigenous people who want to see their lives reflected in literature and in media, and we're doing that. And I think writing autobiographically is crucial in that regard.
Did you find moving? Oh, sorry. Did you find that you know, I guess your prose style? How did you kind of develop that? Because I love the way that you kind of move so effortlessly between you know, these very beautiful metaphorical poetic images and, you know, things like referencing Judith Butler, Foucault, and, you know, kind of blending it all together to almost create, I would say, kind of like almost your own language around your story and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so it's inspired by a lot of theorists who make use of lived experience, and also essayists who have a theoretical or philosophical bent. So like Maggie Nelson, Fred Moten, Claudia Rankine, these writers for whom remaining in any one mode would, you know, be, you know, would stymie creativity. And so I'm thinking, you know, how do I, you know, with what language or which tools can I create, as you say, like my own language of intimacy and history and politics? And this is where I've ended up. I don't, you know, I think my writing will always have this sort of hybridic component to it, and maybe that makes it like less commercially viable, but I'm like willing to sacrifice that if this is what feels authentic, and it is what feels authentic to me right now. Yeah. And I think also I think there's also, you know, your book makes an intervention here as well, but I think in a different way, which is finding a language to talk about, you know, our experiences, embodiment, emotion, mental health, etc., that begins from an Indigenous place. Did you want to talk also a bit about? Oh
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Why you wanted to do that?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because I had I had a conversation. It's funny you talk about the whole idea of like the memoir being more marketable to publishers, because I had to have that conversation. So I have a different publisher for the Canadian version of my book, and I kind of like expanded it and switched out an essay that made more sense in a US context for the US publication of my book. So it's two different publishers, and I'm pretty sure you have two different publishers for your book too. So like it's kind of weird kind of using the same text and trying to kind of see the way that they kind of market it differently depending on what the assumptions they make about the industry they're in are. So I have to actually have a conversation with both publishers because both of them wanted me or were interested in me putting like a memoir at the bottom of my book title. And I was very, very adamant I did not want to do that because to me, I feel like we have to really think about the genres in which we are operating in, or that people are trying to force us to operate in a way. I was aware that I was writing a book of essays from the very beginning. I didn't want to write a memoir because if I wanted to write a memoir, I would have wrote a memoir. And for me, in my head, I'm thinking about, sorry, there's like rain outside right now, so I'm getting distracted. But like, you know, when I think memoir, I think of like, you know, Michelle Obama's On Becoming. I think of like, you know, Justin Trudeau has a memoir, you know what I mean? Like all of these things where I'm just like, okay, so I guess what we're going to be doing, like there's totally a kind of map for the right memoir, and it's always starts with I am born, I'm a child, these things happen to me that affect my life, which I mean, congratulations, that's all of us, but I guess sure. So like this affected me and this affected me and this affected me. And then eventually it leads up to, you know, the end, which if you're still alive, you're like, well, that's it. I'm still alive. I don't know. I guess that's fine, right? Which like, I guess that's quirky, but like that doesn't seem authentic to me. That's not the way that my life works. When I'm reflecting on parts of my life, I'm not trying to put it into a chronological order. I'm trying to order it in terms of what I'm thinking about at that moment. So, you know, I have sections, and like the first, obviously the title essay, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, I was focusing intensely on depression and what that meant in an Indigenous context, what that meant in terms of me being a Haudenosaunee woman who has a white mother in a matrilineal like culture, and what that means for me, what that means in terms of language, because, you know, for a while I thought that I was Tuscarora, and then I found out actually I was Mohawk. So, you know, my aunts who were real pissed when my dad said, we're Tuscarora, they were like, no, we're not. I have a Mohawk tattoo right on my titty. Like they got to keep their, like they were right. So, you know, like my dad was wrong. So, you know, it makes more sense anyways that I'm Mohawk now that I really think about it, but that's neither here nor there. But like, you know, these are the kinds of things that are complexities that I feel like can't even talk about publicly, because people who are trying to, you know, force us into these boxes as, you know, an Indigenous writer, or, you know, I'm supposed to be representative, I guess, of Haudenosaunee people, when, you know, my nation, like I don't have a clan. You know, I have a white mom, you know, I haven't learned the language. You know, I didn't go to school on the res, even though I lived on the res, because there was the high schools were off the res. So like, there's all of these complexities that are contained within my story that I feel it's very unhelpful for me to try and like somehow force that into a chronological kind of weird thing. So for me, the essay is more helpful for me to think through kind of the ways that like colonization or, you know, sexism or, you know, ableism or whatever have impacted my life. And that I think makes more sense too, in terms of when, you know, we talk about abstract concepts, they're so big and everyone's like, racism, whoa, what is racism? Colonialism, whoa, what's that? And everyone will have a different idea of what that means. And so I feel like in some ways, you know, abstract, you know, talking about these things in very abstract ways can be helpful, but when it comes down to it, you know, on the ground, the lived realities, when we are going from places where we're theorizing to actually living those practices or trying to embody them, you know, it means that we have to look at how this actually comes to bear. These big, huge concepts, these big histories, these contexts all come to bear on the individual. And so for me, I found it more helpful for me to like say, okay, here's depression. Here's what depression looks like to me. Here's what depression is, how my people treated depression in terms of grief. We didn't even think about depression as like, you know, a long-standing thing. We always had it connected to a very specific grief. And so when you start thinking through those things and also start, you know, like, I don't know Mohawk, I don't know Genegeha, but I'm hoping to one day. And so like talking to language learners and understanding the way that, you know, Haudenosaunee people in particular, our language is so dense with imagery. And I remember going to, there's the Mush Hole in Brantford. It's, you know, the residential school that all Six Nations students went to. And I remember going through, they do a lot of tours, because they're trying to get money to actually make it into a museum, because there are no museums in Canada at all about residential schools specifically. And that one actually is still up, and they have a lot of stuff. So they've been trying to fundraise for this for a long time with no help from the government of Canada, despite the fact that, you know, they're supposedly all about truth and reconciliation. They're giving Gord Downey, the old lead singer of dearly departed lead singer of Tragically Hip's foundation tons of money, but they're not giving any money to an actual residential school that the survivors want to make into a museum to preserve all of this history. But anyways, so like when I was going through there, I remember them talking about how, they were learning Mohawk, and the way that like the person who was leading us through was learning Mohawk, and how if you're going from English to Chinese, it takes a certain amount of time. Like it's very, very different of a language. So you have to basically shift your entire mindset to be able to understand. And from there, like, so say like this is from English to Chinese is here. English to Mohawk is here. So it's much, much more difficult to learn when you're coming from an English Western mindset, because it's totally different. So anyways, basically I feel like I'm talking a lot, but that's kind of, I just don't feel like when we're putting when other people are trying to force us into labels, I always am the person who's like, no. You are trying to tell me that this is going to sell better as a memoir. I'm telling you, if you say it's a memoir, people are going to expect it to be a fucking, Michelle Obama book. It is not a Michelle Obama book. I love Michelle Obama. She looks real cute, but I did not write that book. I wrote my book. So I want it to be just my book, not my book, a memoir,
Totally. Yeah. And so the book in Canada is called A Memoir for Mine, and in the US has a designation of essays.
Yes.
I also like that it could have those two names at the same time. Gesture to both those genres. But
yes.
I think like you, I did not write with the intention of honoring any particular genre's traditions. I think the writing is less overdetermined than that. And these essays that came together in my book, I didn't sit down to say, I wasn't trying to write something with like a neat, linear, chronological narrative. And I also don't think we live lives of that sort, that neat. And I think I wanted to honor the fact that when I think about what has happened in my life, or key experiences, good or bad, they don't come back to me in that neat, linear way. They come back to me in bits and pieces and out of order, and in surprising moments. And I think I wanted to write a book in that way as well.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating too, because I'm someone who likes to do a lot of research on like the ways that brains work. And it's fascinating when you start looking at the ways that brain scientists actually talk about memory. And the way that they describe memory as a concept is that you are literally telling yourself a story about what happened. So as soon after it happens, it's no longer in the present. You can't keep all of those memories pristine, like they're like, shot on a movie. So like us considering, playing our lives like a movie where it's like, chronological, here's the rising action, here's the climax, here's the denouement, whatever. That isn't how even our brains work. So our brains work in a way where, the more that you go back and create neural pathways, sometimes you can change the memory so that you remember things that maybe didn't even happen, or, the way that you were so hyper-focused on yourself, you didn't understand or even recognize that other things were happening around you. So even the whole concept of taking a memory and putting it down is always going to be a version of telling a story, even chemically in our brains. And I feel like, our people, Indigenous people, knew this, and that's why storytelling was so important. And that's why we didn't always need to have our stories be about people who we knew. We could have stories be about, animals. We could have stories be about, different figures throughout our cultures and stuff like that, important figures. And those still held weight because the stories were not about the individual, they were about something bigger. And I think that that's kind of where I think Indigenous writers are kind of operating on another level than a lot of these non-Indigenous writers. No shade to them or anything, because there's a lot of non-Indigenous writers who I love, but I think that when you're actively aware that that like a nation state wants you to die, it totally causes you to kind of like grip onto whatever life preservers you have. And for a lot of us, that is culture, that is community, that is, you know, whatever we can, basically.
Yeah. I think I said recently in another Zoom thing that I don't write out of desperation anymore. I think that was one of the primary modes when I wrote my first book, This Women's of the World. But I think that there is this general condition of despair that we as Indigenous writers write from, again, because we're still very much in the thick of all these, you know, state manufactured forms of violence we see everywhere. It continues to unfold, even as, you know, the pandemic restructures our sense of what everyday life is and can be. And, you know, I wonder about how you are thinking about despair, but perhaps as importantly or more importantly, joy in writing from those places, sometimes simultaneously.
Yes. Okay. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I really do think that people don't give Indigenous writers enough credit for how fucking funny we are. Like, like the fact that, you know, no shade, but like the only Indigenous writers who are allowed to be funny, at least coming out of Canada, are Thomas King and Drew Hayden Taylor. Pretty much everyone else that we don't like, they don't talk about how funny Cherie Demeline is. They don't talk about how funny Eden Robinson is. They don't talk about how funny Leanne Simpson is, even though they're all fucking hilarious. And like, we as Indigenous people, I think, because we almost have like, it's so fucked. We almost come from like a ground zero of despair, because we are all post-apocalyptic. We are all post-apocalyptic, still trying to fucking crawl our way out of this apocalypse that is still happening, you know? And that's the thing, is it's even weird to call us post-apocalyptic, because the apocalypse, I think, of an indigeneity and, you know, what the Western world wants to do to us to be able to get what they want is still happening. It is an apocalypse that has not stopped. It is an apocalypse that has spanned generations and that is still happening. So it's kind of weird for me to say post-apocalyptic, but still, you know, when we're operating from that space, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to cling to other than those moments of joy? And so, you know, for me, I think there's a reason why whenever you get a bunch of Indigenous women in a room, you will have to close your fucking ears, because we will be laughing so hard. We will be making jokes about sex. We'll be making jokes about the, you know, the Indigenous men who ain't shit to us. You know, we will be doing all of this stuff, but we will be doing it from a place of joy. We'll be doing it from a place of, you know, community and care also. And so for me, I think that, you know, as much as people like to say, like, it's really funny to me, actually, people based on my Twitter persona or whatever are always expect me to be like some really mean, bitchy person. And, you know, when they meet me, they're like, oh my God, you're so funny. You're so fun. You're so nice. And I'm like, yep, I'm a human. Like, cool. Yeah. You guys see me as angry because I'm pissed off that my people are, you know, currently at 1492 Lamback Lane getting arrested for existing on our territory that we have title to, that they do not, Canada doesn't have title to, and they know that. They can't prove that shit. And yet they're arresting my people every single day. And the news in Canada is just watching and just like hands off about it, so that the independent journalists who are covering this are the ones who are getting arrested too. So like, the kind of thing that I'm operating from, where I'm just like, okay, so you guys all want to joke and laugh about like Canada's drag race. Well, that's cool. I do too. But also I'm aware that this is happening in my community and I'm fucking pissed about it. So like, we contain multitudes. And I think it's weird that, you know, white guys are allowed to supposedly contain multitudes, although I have questions about that. I don't think they contain multitudes at all. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Okay, I should be clear. I guess some white man contain multitudes, but bitch, you better prove it to me, because if you're acting the way that you seem to be, I will call you out on it. And if you don't prove differently, then I'm sorry, you don't contain multitudes, honey. Like, I'm sorry, that's not my fault. Try harder, be more deep, like ask yourself questions. But anyways, I want to ask you something actually. This is so I kind of feel like, from my experience anyway, that there is this desperate desire for, well, particularly in Canada, but also in the US too, for Indigenous writers to be no longer artists or writers where we, talk about our craft and we talk about all of this stuff. Instead, they want us to be translators of indigeneity for the purposes of, I don't know, whatever. How have you been finding navigating that like pressure for us to be kind of like the token, the token Indian, but also I want to say the token translator of indigeneity, of Indianness. So how do you navigate that? Because like you also are super young, and like even though you're so fucking smart, I feel like there's the danger of a lot of people who are older than you in terms of like Earth years thinking that they know more than you. So anyway, how do you deal with that?
It makes me think of, I saw someone tweeting recently, it was an Irish writer, Nisha Dolan, I think is her name. Anyway, she was saying that there's this publishing trend in which publishers are turning identity categories into genres. And I think that's absolutely what's happening with Indigenous literature, especially at the corporate houses. And in other forms of literature, Black literature too. And obviously what's wrong with that is that what's crucial about our book is not its artfulness, but it's like sociological possibilities. It's, resonance for non-Indigenous people, particularly white people. And again, it does push us into the role, as you say, of a translator. I think very few of us, to speak generally, probably get into writing to become, translators or like material care sociologists for white people. It's not my vibe for sure.
Who has time?
Totally, especially nowadays. Like why I continue to write and why I love writing and why I teach writing is because I think it taps us into this artfulness and gracefulness that are important for being in the world in ways that don't feel shitty. Yeah, I also just I just really love the challenge of writing as beautifully or poetically or smartly or whatever as possible, and perhaps we don't get allowed to want those things.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I think that I think it's very interesting too, the ways that the industry tries to pit us against one another as though, there's only room for one at the top. And they want there to be only room for one at the top, because that means that person, if they hold the fucking carrot out and they're like, here, we'll give you this if you fuck over queer and trans Indigenous people. We'll give you this carrot if you fuck over women and don't support them, or even worse, fucking push them out of the industry. Same with trans and queer writers, two-spirit writers, push them out of the industry. We'll give you this carrot, though, if you do all of that. And this carrot is going to give you everything you want in terms of money, in terms of power, in terms of prestige. And there are people who will take that carrot who are Indigenous. Most of them are Indigenous men. Most of them are cis Indigenous men, straight Indigenous men. And I have no problem saying that at all, because that's just the way it is. Like, they take the carrot. Go ahead, take the carrot. But, don't take the carrot and then come back to us and ask us for help when you fuck up, and when they decide that you're not the token for them anymore, when they decide to pull the fucking rug out from under you. And, Sherman Alexie in the US, you know what I mean? Where's he at? I remember when he wrote his book that he was talking about, like his last book that was published, it was all about having a mother who has bipolar disorder, which I have a mother who has bipolar disorder. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll pick this up. And then all of those accusations came out from Indigenous women. And I am friends with some of those Indigenous women. Basically the scramble for the tippy top, that gap that Sherman Alexie left has not been filled. But I think it's not because people don't want it to be filled. I think it's because the Indigenous writers that are operating now are aware of they want us to take the fucking carrot and leave all of our community, all of our friends, all of our family in the dirt so that we can have that at the top. And to me, I think the younger Indigenous writers who are coming up, we are all aware that they are trying to pit us against one another, that they're trying to be like, oh, Alicia, you wrote a memoir. You know who else wrote a memoir? Therese Mayhat. Yeah, Therese Mayhat's a fucking awesome bitch and I love her and I will never talk her work down. I don't give a shit if she gets more recognition than me, if she gets more sales. I don't give a shit. She wrote a fucking great book and I'm happy for her. And this is something that really confuses the industry because they still are operating under the assumption that we all want to be the token ones at the top instead of people who want to create communities, who want to create bridges, who want to create industry and infrastructure that is not like that, that doesn't have an arrow, that is more like this, where we can also reach out and kind of create roots and branches and build something strong and important that's going to last and that is not going to have to fall to pieces when one person and their shitty behavior makes it impossible for them to be at the top any longer.
Yeah. It does make me think about what Indigenous literary spaces look like right now in the digital era, the Zoom era. We don't get to talk to one another as much anymore. I was thinking the other day how it could be good for us, not on a Zoom event, not in public, to come together on a digital call just to check in and whatnot, because I think what I love so much about literary festivals is that we would get those moments to walk away from the building or whatever, outside of programming time, to get together and to just check in and laugh and all that stuff that's really important to a holistic person. We aren't getting that. It's like, what are your thoughts on that?
I have to say, I have developed a lot of relationships with Indigenous writers that are totally not public. They're totally private because they're for me. They're for me and those writers. So, I feel like there's totally a difference between doing things, I guess, for clout and doing things for community. And me, there are people who who need to make it very public anytime they do one thing that's good for anyone. And I always find that very interesting because those people tend to think that we don't talk and we don't know that they only did that one thing, and they're trying to claim like they did more, but they didn't. And this is something that I see a lot in activist communities specifically. Going back to, because I it's just fresh on my mind, 1492 Land Back Lane, that's happening in my territory. From the very beginning, that was started by women, but the people who were in front of the camera were men. Almost like at first it was the women, but then but then once things got to a certain critical mass where Mohawks, we love to cause shit. So the Mohawk men, once they were like blockades up, then it was all the men who were front and center, and all of them were wearing camo, and all of them had masks on, and all of them were raising the Mohawk warrior flag, which is a good photo op. I love it. I love camo. I love Mohawk warrior flags, all that shit. I love, all of that. But once they wrestle that power from the women, then that means that it is no longer community. It is all for clout. And I'm very happy actually that right now, 1492 Land Back Lane, the person who the indigenous, like the Haudenosaunee man who is doing most of the speaking is Skylar Williams, and I love Skylar. He is fucking solid dude. He has a big beautiful family. He is friends with Tawny Williams, who is a spoken word poet, who is just a fucking awesome solid person, and they're the heart of it right now. And so for me, I'm like, yes, this is the activism that I am behind. I'm not saying that Indigenous men can't be at the front, but I am saying Indigenous men need to remember where they come from, who is supporting them, who created these spots for them so that they could speak. You know what I mean? And also they need to be aware that, if they say shit that we don't like, we're going to say something back to them. And if they don't like it, then maybe they shouldn't be leaders at all. I don't know. So for me, I just kind of feel like, when we're talking about creating community, we have to be also talking about who is doing that work behind the scenes, who is doing that work without getting any credit, because if you're really doing it for community, you don't need credit. So yeah, that's kind of like, I guess, where I'm at with it, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
I want to ask one thing. Okay, because you were totally like, I feel so bad. You went straight from doing Scholar Strike Canada stuff to here. So I just want to ask, what is a fun thing you're gonna do today? What's a fun thing you're gonna do today?
Well, I'm gonna go hang out with my partner and his dog later today. So that's always.
What kind of dog is it? You know?
Yeah, she is. She's 7 years old. So,
oh, she's a little old. She's getting a little older.
Totally. She's part Rottweiler, German Shepherd, Shiba.
Oh my gosh!
Actually, yeah, she was from a res in interior BC.
She's totally a res dog then, eh?
Yeah, I love that. What about you? How about you?
I'm actually probably going to, I don't know, watch probably Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, because I'm just really into all these white women who are like so sad because money doesn't buy them happiness, but also they're on private jets and fighting over like seats courtside at the Kings game. So, I mean, I'm into it. I love it. I love the drama, as long as it's not my drama.
Totally. Let's vibe with that.
Also, I want to ask, are you working on anything new writing-wise? Or are you just kind of like, oh my fucking God, Alicia, shut the fuck up. I just,
No.
Which is valid.
That's not okay. I'm working on a bit of fiction, actually.
Really?
I'm trying to write something about Northern Alberta.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. Okay, good.
You're also working on fiction?
Yeah, I'm working on fiction, but I paused that because I went through a breakup, and so now I'm writing poetry. So I feel like that is the thing that you do when you go through a breakup. You write poetry. So.
Absolutely. That's how I wrote my first book. In the throes of
so that's what I'm doing. I'm taking writing fiction to write poetry.
I saw your tweet that was like, how do poets know if they've written a bad poem? Did you get any good feedback?
My favorite one was my favorite thing that is immediately coming to mind is if a white dude wrote it, then it's bad. Or right, if a white dude could have written it, it's bad.
Oh my gosh. Again,
I feel like so many people are like, Alicia hates white people, which like I'm not even gonna dignify that with a response. Look at my fucking skin. Are you kidding me right now? But anyways, I feel like, to me, I've always been someone who hasn't really, you know, in terms of when I was in creative writing school and all that shit, I was never the top student. Everyone was always like, oh, it's good, but like good, pat on the head kind of shit. So I've always known that, you know, I have to trust myself and my intuition. And, you know, I'm very good at researching and reading and figuring out what I like and what I don't like and analyzing what I think works and what doesn't work. And so, you know, for me to move into poetry is scary, because for the longest time, I felt like I didn't know how to read it because I was coming at it from a very intellectual level and, you know, in a kind of a distanced way. And it was only, I think, after I was like, you know what, don't worry too much about if you get it, just like worry about what you feel. Then that's when it kind of broke open for me. And so with that knowledge, it's a little bit easier for me to be like, even if it's shitty, like, who cares? I like it. You know what I mean? Which I think is so important for all writers to just at some point be like, even if it's shitty, even if someone thinks it's shitty, I like it. So it's kind of
like shitty to whom?
Yes, exactly, right? Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, there's so much bad writing out there. Who cares? If I want to put out some bad writing, then I'm damn gonna put out some bad writing too.
Word. Also, your book was on a huge screen in New York City, I saw.
Yes, it was. And it was all like blue with like the US cover is so pretty. It's like teal with like orange leaves. And I had some people being like, are you like a little annoyed that there's maple leaves on your book cover? Do you think that that's like a cliche? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? do you understand anything about Haudenosaunee people? Do you understand that the maple leaf was not just Canada? Like the maple leaf predates Canada by a fucking long time. And my people are very, very much in tune with maple trees, tapping maple and all of this stuff, creating sap, all of that. So like, to me, it's a Haudenosaunee cover. It's not my fault that Canada decided to take take our symbols, paint it fucking red, and then say, this is Canada. You know what I mean? Like that, who cares?
Active reclamation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I feel like we were told that we have to like give the last 10 minutes for potential questions.
Actually, if you guys want to keep talking, you go right ahead. I have a couple questions myself, but yeah, if you guys have more questions for each other, I'll just say it.
You can ask a question, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like, I hope they're good. So one, I kind of want to circle back to memoirs because you guys talked about them quite a bit at the beginning. And I really love what you had to say about them, but I was wondering, and this is for both of you, but would you ever, well, Alicia, I know you said you kind of disagree with that chronological order and the idea of it, but would you ever write a piece, write a memoir, anything in that chronological order? Can you see yourself doing that?
It's funny that you say that, actually, because the novel I'm working on is very anti-chronological as well. So like at first I was like I think that's why I had such a hard time with fiction at first, is because I had to figure out structure. And the way I did that was actually through learning about structure through screenwriting. And once I figured that out, because screenwriting is very much like by page 10, you have to have this, by page 30, by page 60, by page 90, has to happen. And it was only through understanding that structure that I got why structure is, so effective. So like, obviously I come from an oratory people who are natural storytellers who tell things in chronological order. However, the funny thing about fiction is that it's not oratory and I can do whatever the fuck I want with it. And so for me, I think also it's important for me to recognize, and this is something I've been working on a lot in terms of my writing, is kind of trying to infuse kind of the philosophy of Haudenosaunee storytelling, which means when like a storyteller tells a story, it's a live event. And the person who is telling the story determines how they're going to tell the story by who they're telling it to. So if you're telling a story to a bunch of kids, you're going to tell it very different than if you're telling a story to a bunch of adults. You're not going to have the dirty jokes with the kids, but you will have the dirty jokes with the adults. And, if you're talking to people who don't know anything about your culture, you're going to have a very different way of approaching that conversation than if you're talking to people who know everything, or like at least know where you're coming from. So like for me, trying to look at fiction as a fixed thing, an object that I can't control whether someone, which like it's hard for control freaks, right? I can't control how they're gonna read it. So what I'm trying to do and what I'm interested in is using different genres, different boundary pushing methods, and moving out of chronological order and all of this stuff to create more of a experience that I feel like reflects the story I want to tell, the way I want it to be told. So the fiction I'm working on actually is really meta, which I know postmodernism, whatever, but like it's very, very meta. Like I'm also very interested in taking auto fiction away from the white bitches who seem to think that they have it all figured out, but let me tell you, they don't. So I want to take that from them, but also infuse that with other things I love, like horror, like erotica, like sci-fi. I like these things. I like to push them all together and create this fucked up thing, and then be like, here's this fucked up thing. Do you guys like it? So that's what I like to do. So yeah, I don't know. To answer your question, I see like if I'm speaking in front of an audience, like if I do speeches, which is something I do, I will follow a chronological order because that is important for people to understand. But when I'm doing fiction, no.
I got it. And then for you, Billy Ray, as you get later in your life, say as you grow older, would you revisit?
You approach your 30s.
As you approach, when once you are in your golden ages of who knows, however old, would you write another memoir, or would you use a different vehicle to do that overarching share of experience?
Yeah, it's hard to say. In that, yeah, I think I usually begin with, the creative material as opposed to the genre or the mode, and I let the former necessitate the latter. So we'll see how my life unfolds, like what the emotional contours of my existence will be.
You don't know?
I cannot predict. No.
Are you kidding me? You're not going to have your like midlife crisis book already like penciled in for a release date?
I do not. No, I do not. But I think there's something appealing about, like, I think about, like, again, the Argonauts and how it's structured. I said, like, is what structures it. I like, where the chronology is not like a seemingly arbitrary choice or a conventional one, required by something embodied or a larger political thing. Like, I've been thinking about writing something that I want to write about the 90s, even though
yes,
in the 90s
I lived,
and thinking about like the beginning of Canada's reconciliation agenda. Like, I think there's something in like letting, like I said, something other than convention dictate structure and chronology. So yeah, I may dabble.
Cool. I mean, that's all we can hope for. I have, looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question, but I'm gonna make it long because I'm gonna combine mine and an audience member's question.
Cool.
So I'm gonna try to do this in a way that makes sense. So you guys spoke so much about community and culture, and I love the idea that culture and community as life preservers, and not only in the sense of surviving these like apocalyptic times, but also as a preservation of the culture and community. And also what you said, like, we contain multitudes. Beautiful sentiment. My question with that is, what advice would you give to other Indigenous writers, artists, creators, younger or older, and this can be any advice, but Erin McDonald asked, she's been told that you should write something for yourself and not expect publication. And so she was wondering, when you decide, like, when do you decide and how do you battle imposter syndrome or doubts, and like, how do you overcome them? So I felt like that was one. It's a lot, but I feel like
are we gonna get cut off in 3 minutes or no?
Well, you won't get cut off, but like and Alicia, I know you've probably got I know
I'll try it.
Let's look.
I'll try and say it real quick, and then I'll hand it over to Billy for him to take us home because, he's a doctor. He knows how to do it.
He knows how to zip it up tight.
But, okay, so I'm just going to say, I feel like, not to be that bitch, but we're living in a material world, and I'm a material girl. If you want to make money from your writing, which you deserve to do if you're a writer, you deserve to make money from your writing, then yes, write it for yourself. But be aware that you are going to have to advocate for yourself, because the industry is going to try and tell you what you should do, is going to try and tell you what should sell. But let me tell you right now, my book has done well, despite the fact that people tried to tell me that I should write a certain way that I didn't want to write it. And it's still doing well. And I got my US contract based on a Goodreads review, not even based on my agents sending out, which they sent out to a lot of publishers, this book, and they just didn't even give a shit. It was only when someone went and read some Goodreads reviews of my book that they went and were like, let's get this manuscript and then let's sign this. So like, do what you're doing, but be prepared to advocate for yourself if you want to sell your work, which you should.
Yeah, I'll say too that if the work is beginning from that kind of rich emotional place, then, and it's, there's both that attention to like personal experience, emotion, and to craft, then it's like the industry, or like publishing people, etc., will want that for you as well. and I think there's also like you can write in a way that is uncategorizable, as I think both Alicia and I have proven, and do well on the market. The market's shifting,
Mm-hmm.
and it will continue to. And it's also the responsibility of publishing people to attune to that, ongoing fluctuation of aesthetic taste and what readers want. And readers want stories that are written in that personal way and that show someone's humanity and whatnot. And so yeah, like that's I would say keep going.
I mean, I think that's all you can do, really, is keep going. Well, with that, I just want to thank you to Billy Ray Belcourt and Alicia Elliott, and congratulations on A History of My Brief Body and A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. Thank you to our sponsors, Whitefish Review, Black Coffee Roasting Company, and Stockman Bank of Montana. And thank you to everyone watching and participating. You've been a great audience. Just as a reminder, you can purchase books by these authors and many others. I don't even know if I panned you guys. You could be a book. Just at Fact and Fiction's website, factandfictionbooks.com. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival with our MBF Plus events. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great one.
Yes.